Welcome to another episode of So You Think You Know Westerville. You may have heard about Otterbein's first African American graduate, William Henry Fouse, who earned his degree in 1893. Fouse was also the first African American to graduate from Westerville's high school course of study, and Fouse Elementary is named after him. But did you know that Fouse wasn't actually the first African American student to attend Otterbein? That honor belongs to a man named William Hannibal Thomas, a free black who attended Otterbein briefly in 1859. About 10 days after starting his course of study, he described, quote, "Meetings were held at which inflammatory speeches were made. I was assaulted on the street. In the classroom, the leaves of my books were torn out, and I was struck with shawl pins by those who sat around me. When I passed out of the building, groups of waiting students pelted me with rocks hidden in wet snowballs." One student in particular called him the N-word over and over in front of the faculty, who remained, quote, "silent and uneasy." "Through it all I sat," Thomas remembered, "humiliated and angered." He believed these incidents were instigated by other events happening simultaneously around the country, particularly abolitionist John Brown's raid on a federal armory at Harper's Ferry in what is now West Virginia. Brown hoped his actions would incite a massive slave rebellion across the South. There were apparently several Otterbein students from the Harper's Ferry area, and according to Thomas, they expressed their displeasure with John Brown through their treatment of the sole black student at their school. Otterbein's trustees believed Thomas would come to harm, so they urged him to withdraw, and actually when he resisted, they threatened him with expulsion. After the completion of that term, Thomas did not return to Otterbein. He fought in the Civil War, seeing action in Virginia and North Carolina, and lost his right arm. After the war, he lived all over the country, serving as a member in the South Carolina legislature, a colonel in the National Guard, a lawyer, a minister, and a teacher. But despite this impressive resume, Thomas led a troubled life after he left Westerville. He grew increasingly bitter and hurled angry, loathing accusations at his fellow African Americans. These attitudes started coming out in the 1890s and were finally fully expressed in his book, The American Negro, in 1901. In it, Thomas blamed blacks for their social, economic, and political problems. He painted them as vulgar, frivolous, arrogant, simple-minded, and inherently degraded. He asserted that light-skinned African Americans were superior to those with dark skin. And finally, he claimed that the only way that African Americans could improve their lot in life was by improving their moral character, modeling it after white people and light-skinned African Americans like himself. White audiences generally considered William Hannibal Thomas an authority on African American life, and white supremacists loved him, but other black intellectuals strongly condemned Thomas's writings and his racism. It's an ugly, complicated legacy to grapple with. And honestly, it's hard to imagine that his experience in Westerville didn't contribute in some way, whether consciously or unconsciously, to his disillusionment, bigotry, and his desire to distance himself from other Black Americans. If you're interested in learning more about William Hannibal Thomas, I'd recommend reading John David Smith's book, Black Judas. By shedding light on uncomfortable histories like this one, we gain a truer understanding of our past, a clearer vision of our present, and hopefully a more humble mindset as we work towards a better future. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for another episode of So You Think You Know Westerville.